Hello, everybody, and welcome to the final Angular World Tour of 2022. Just of 2022. We'll be back in 2023, but welcome to the final Angular World Tour of 2022. My name is Rob Osell. I'm an architect at This.Labs. My co-host today is Bruce Wiggleston. Bruce is a DevRel engineer at This.Labs as well. Hey, Bruce, how you doing?
Good. How are you?
Good. Angular World Tour is a collaboration between Angular Mountain View, Angular SF, Modern Web, and GDG Silicon Valley. And we are so excited to bring some amazing talks today to you from some amazing speakers to those amazing groups. So first and foremost, I'm going to introduce our speakers and then we'll dive right in. Speaking first tonight will be Deborah. Deborah Carrata is a software developer, independent consultant, Pluralsight author, speaker, Microsoft MVP, and Google GDE, and somebody that I have been dying to meet, who I followed on Twitter for a long time, and I'm glad at least we get to virtually meet for once. Deborah, how are you doing?
Great. It's great to be talking to the group. I'm hoping that we can start some of these in person sometime soon.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely can't wait. I got a chance to go to a conference last week for the first time in a few years, and the energy of people as they're meeting for the first time, it's so infectious. I was so energized when I came back from the conference. All right, and then speaking up second today will be Lemis. She's a Google developer expert for Angular, an Auth0 ambassador, and the writer of reactive patterns for RxJS Angular applications. She is an enthusiastic software engineer with a strong passion for the modern web. She's a founder of Angular Tunisia, a member of the Women Who Code community, speaker, content creator, and trainer. So many more things that I could go on about. Lemis, how are you doing today?
How are you? Thank you for the great intro.
Yeah, we're so glad to have you here. So without further ado, we will dive into things. But as we get started here and set things up, I just want to let everybody know, thank you for joining us. Please feel free to drop your questions in the chat that you might have for the speakers. We're going to go through both of the talks. And then at the conclusion of both talks, we'll come back and answer any questions that were raised for either of the two talks. So as you're listening, if anything pops in your mind, please feel free to leave it in the chat room. And we'll make sure to raise it at the end of the talk. So up first is Deborah. Deborah, why don't you take it away?
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to talk about RxJS best practices. They aren't always black and white. My name's Deborah Carrata. I just recently resurrected my YouTube channel from 2013. I've posted 3 courses up there, an introduction to programming, HTML, and GitHub, if you're interested in that kind of thing. And here is me in one of my favorite places. I don't know if anyone recognizes where that is, but I'm a huge fan. All right, so my first best practice, be declarative. What does that mean exactly? When we learn RxJS, we often learn to do it procedurally. So this is our procedure or our function, where here in this case, we're going to get users. So we have a function that we call and that returns that observable that emits an array of users. A declarative approach would instead declare a user's $variable. So instead of returning the observable, we're declaring a variable that will hold that observable. Why do we care? Why would we want to do that? Well, there are definitely some benefits to using a declarative approach. First of all, we can compose data streams more easily because we have access to those variables holding those observables. We can easily communicate between components because other components can then subscribe to those observables. We can better manage application state, and we can react to actions. And we'll talk more about these throughout this talk. Excuse me. So as soon as I show this, frequently the comment I get is, but Deborah, what about parameters? In this particular case, I need a parameter on my URL that I'm sending to my HTTP GET. Without a procedure or a function, how am I going to pass that in? So I can't do the declarative approach because I have to have stuff to pass in. So the response to that is, instead of using a procedural approach and passing it in, go reactive. What do I mean by that one? Well, we're going to talk through that using a scenario. And in this scenario, I am a member of a team, and here are all my team members that are listed as users down here. I just have one listed because that's the one I've picked here. So I come in the morning or anytime during the day, and I want to see how my team is doing. I can pick one of the team members, and I can see the title of their task. This is a to-do list. We like to do all of our tasks in Latin. And then we mark whether that's completed or not. So I can look through here and see maybe one of my team members needs a little help, or maybe one of them needs more stuff because they've finished everything or whatever. So that's my scenario. When we pick a person from this list, I select something from this. I want to go get the information for that person. So how do I do that? How do I react to that action of picking someone from that list? Well, the first thing I need to do is declare an action stream. We'll look at how to do each of these steps in a moment. Then we emit a notification when the action occurs. Lastly, then we react to that notification. So we declare a stream, we emit notifications into the stream. So any part of the application that's subscribed will get notified. Then any part of the application can react to that notification every time they get a notification. All right, so how do they do these things? Well, to declare an action stream, we use a subject or a behavior subject. We make it private. So notice that I've got the private keyword here, and we put this in a subject. That way we're encapsulating this. We're keeping it safe inside our service. No other part of the application can then emit anything into the stream or error the stream out or accidentally complete it or whatever. We then know that anytime anything is getting into the stream, it's coming from our service. But we do want any part of the application to be able to subscribe. So we expose a variable by declaring an observable here. And I'm using a $sign just so I visually can tell that that's an observable. And I expose then that read-only part of the observable that's just going to emit these notifications. So that was the first step. The second step then is to emit the notification. So in my service, I have a method that when given a user ID, it emits it into the stream. So I have that ID being emitted. So any part of the application that is subscribing will be notified of that change. So we call the subject or behavior subjects next method. Our third step then is to react to the notification. So again, anywhere in the application, we can perform an action when the item is emitted. So here is our action stream. We're going to emit the user ID into this stream. Then we can pipe that through a switch map in this example, and we can go ahead and get the user data. So here I am using my parameter for my URL. So I'm using a declarative approach, but I still have a parameter on my URL to go get, perform my HTTP GET. So I can get related data, I can save on an action or whatever else I need to do by using this declarative and reactive approach. Okay, the next thing I wanted to talk about is merge map, concat map, and switch map. Oh my. This is another one that's not always so black and white. If you go up to Stack Overflow, pretty much the answer to any RxJS question is use switch map. And so that might look like that's always the best practice. But again, best practices aren't always black and white. It really depends on what you're trying to accomplish. So let's take a closer look at these. So here we have that same basic scenario, but now we want to actually get these to-dos. We want to retrieve those. So every time that that user ID is emitted, we want to use some kind of map operation and get the associated array of to-dos for that user. And again, I'm including that user ID as a parameter to my URL. All right. So the first one is concat-map. You can sort of think of concat-map like a relay race. Emitted values are queued and processed in order. This first runner can never go past the second runner, and so on. It performs the mapping operation, which in this case is running, and then it waits for it to complete. The second runner has to wait for that first runner to complete before it can start. And then the third runner has to wait for that second runner to complete before it starts. So I like to think of concat-map as a relay. It helps me remember how that one works. It always then retains that emission order. Again, this first person cannot get in front of the second runner. Let's look at a more realistic scenario for our example, kind of going back to our to-dos. Now, what I'm doing in this example is I'm going to that user interface that you saw, and I'm picking the second, that's what this to means here, the second user from that list, that second team member. And then I realized that that wasn't the one I was interested in. So then I picked the third one. And then I realized that wasn't right either, and I picked the first one. So here I'm kind of changing my mind from the second one on the list to the third one to the first one. And what will concat-map do in this process? Well, it's going to issue that GET request for that second one because I told it to, and then it's going to wait. It's going to wait for the response to come back for that second team member. Then it's going to get the third one and wait for that one to come back. And then finally, it's going to get the one I really wanted and wait for that one to come back. Okay, so depending upon the user interface, the user might see the second one flash up and then the third one flash up before they finally get that first one. And it's definitely not very time efficient. So for this particular scenario, concat-map isn't the best practice. It isn't the best option. So when would you use concat-map? Concat-map is great when emissions have to be processed sequentially, one at a time, and the order matters. So an example would be an insert, update, or delete operation. Say I did an insert and then immediately updated that inserted item. I want to ensure that that insert is complete and finished before doing that update operation. Otherwise, when I go to try to update that row, it might not be inserted yet. So concat-map is great in that scenario. Merge map, you can think of like the 800 meter. They all start out running at the same time. They're all emitted immediately. Then it performs the mapping operation, in this example, running, and the emission order is not maintained. The first person off the line may not be the person that wins. And when you see the 800 meter, you know that they kind of all merge in, and that's how I can helps me remember merge map for the 800 meter. All right, again, going back to our 2, 3, 1 example, what's going to happen in this case is when I say 2, it's going to issue the GET request for 2. As soon as I pick 3, it'll issue that GET request, and 1 will issue that GET request. Then, just like the 800 meter, which one comes back first is whichever one was fastest. So in this case, 3 might be fastest because the third team member had the fewer number of to-dos. Then 1, then finally 2. So what I end up with as the user looking at the screen is I picked last the first team member, but I have the data, the to-dos for the second team member. So this is definitely not the best choice for this scenario. When is it best practice to use merge map? Whenever emissions, we want them to be processed concurrently because it's more performant, but the order doesn't matter. So an example is retrieving related data when the criteria doesn't change. And let's look at another one then, the switch map. You can think of switch map as the coach changing their mind. I'm going to start this runner. No, this runner. No, I want to switch to this runner. But ultimately, only one of the runners runs. So the emitted value stops processing of the prior emitted value. It switches to the new emitted value and performs the mapping operation. Then it repeats. So again, going to our scenario, we go to get 2 as soon as I pick that one. Picking 3 cancels 2 and starts to issue the request for 3. Picking 1 cancels 3 and starts to get 1. If I don't pick another one, then it will return 1, and this is the best choice for this particular scenario. So we want to use switch map when only the latest emission matters, like retrieving based on a user selection or type ahead. All right, so the next one I want to talk about is fork join versus combine latest versus zip. What are best practices regarding those 3? So in this example, I have 2 simple observables, 1, 2, 3, 4, and ABC. Fork join is a creation function, not a pipeable operator. That means I'm calling it and it's going to create an observable, joining these 2 observables. It's not part of the pipe operation. A fork join waits for all observables to emit and complete. So a fork join won't emit until all of its observables, however many it has here, are complete. And then it emits the last value from each one. So what's going to happen here is this is going to emit 1, 2, 3, 4. This is going to emit ABC, and then the fork join will only emit once, the 4 and the C, the last value from each observable. So you might think to yourself, well, that doesn't seem very useful. But when you think about it, one of the primary things we use RxJS for in our Angular applications is working with data. And every HTTP request we do is one and done. So they emit and complete. So it actually works quite well with a fork join. Let's look at a more realistic kind of example. So in this case, I have a small enough number of users that instead of picking a user and getting their to-dos, I'm just going to get all of their users and the to-dos and kind of put them in one single UI. So here I'm getting all of the users and I'm piping it through with a merge map. And I want merge map for performance. So here is a best practice of using merge map to get these to run concurrently and as quickly as possible, because I don't necessarily care about the order of these operations. I can always sort it alphabetically or whatever after the fact. So then here I'm using fork join. I'm taking each of the users that this has retrieved and I'm mapping it using the array map to go get the to-dos for that user and put them into this structure. By using a fork join, it will immediately process each one of these, but it will not emit anything until all of them have completed. So this is really nice, and it will wait for us to get all of the users' to-dos and then return the users with to-dos. So it's great for getting related data for each item in an array. All right, combine latest is next. It's the same example. It's also a creation function, not a pipeable operator. Combine latest is different from fork join in that it waits for all observables to emit at least once. So it doesn't wait for them all to complete, but they each have to emit at least once. So you need to be careful if you use these with a subject, because a subject won't emit right away. A behavior subject always has that initial emitted value. So when you subscribe, you get something. With a subject, when you subscribe, you won't necessarily get anything until the subject emits its next value. So you need to watch out for subjects when you use combine latest, because you could hold up the whole combine latest from emitting. So then the combine latest will emit when any of the observables emit after they've each emitted at least once, and it emits the latest value from each observable. So A will emit 1, 2, 3, 4. It won't, combine latest won't emit anything yet because the second one hasn't emitted. As soon as the A here is emitted, then it emits the A and the 4. When B emits, it emits the other way around, I guess, 4 and the B, and then the 4 and the C. And that's what you'll get here for these. Again, looking at a more realistic example, frequently combine latest is used anytime you want to combine any kind of data. You might see it to combine all of the streams that you want for a particular user interface. So here I'm using VM for view model. I'm combining all of my streams, and that way I only have to have one async pipe in my user interface. Okay. Zip is the last one then of the set. So it is also a creation function. So I'm calling it directly. It waits until each observable emits, like the combine latest does. Then it emits the value from each observable as a set, and then repeats. Whoops. Okay, so here it's going to emit 1, 2, 3, 4, but zip isn't going to emit anything because the second observable hasn't emitted yet. As soon as this A is emitted, then it emits 1A. When the B is emitted, it emits 2B. When C is emitted, it emits 3C, and it tosses the 4 away. So zip is kind of like a zipper. It's going to zip those values together. A little bit more realistic example, but here I'm going to make the incredibly dangerous assumption that all my users are coming in the exact same order as their profiles so that I can match them up and they will match. A much better solution would be to check the profiles to make sure it's the right user, but that's one example. The only place I have actually used zip in the real world is with the group by operator, because it's great for handling key and value pairs, which is what you work with when you work with the group by operator. I have an example of the group by operator and how to use it with the zip in one of the RxJS YouTube videos I recently posted this week, I think. All right, now there's a couple of additional basic best practices that I didn't feel right doing this talk without covering. So I'm going to go through those. First of all, don't forget to unsubscribe. If you subscribe, then be sure you unsubscribe. That's a pretty basic one. And better yet, don't subscribe at all. And in this case, we're going to use an async pipe here instead of a subscription. So we're going to async pipe on our users dollar so that we can get our list of users. You can make a joke about this when you see it on YouTube. Don't subscribe. Anyway, all right, moving on. The nice thing about the async pipe is it automatically subscribes, automatically unsubscribes, and re-renders on each emitted item. Don't forget error handling. You want to make sure you handle your errors so you can do a catch error in your pipe. And then your handle error would look something like that. And you can do whatever you want here. You can throw in an error to the UI if you want to or whatever. And just to point out that our error handler returns an observable of never, which emits no items and never completes. Okay. Don't nest subscribes. This is probably one you've heard of before. So here I'm using the procedural approach to get the user and their to-dos. So here I'm getting the user and I'm subscribing to that. Inside, I'm getting the to-dos and I'm subscribing to that. So here I have a nested subscribe. So this subscribe is nested inside the other one. And we don't want to do this. What could we do instead? Well, the best answer is to go reactive and to do it that way. But if you wanted to not nest subscribes and still use a procedural approach, you can use a higher order mapping operator. So here is our outer observable where we're getting our user and we're subscribing. And then here is our inner observable where we're getting our to-do for that user. But we don't have to subscribe to this because our higher order mapping operator like switch map, merge map, or concat map will automatically subscribe to any of its inner observables. So then you don't have that nested subscribe. And then just for terminology, this outer one is the outer observable and that inner one is the inner observable. When I first read that, I was incredibly confused by those terms. But if you actually look at it, look at the code, it's intuitively obvious which one is the outer and which is the inner. But I just wanted to throw out those terms. All right, best practice number one, have fun with it. All right, so you can find the code that goes with this in my GitHub, and this is my newly resurrected YouTube channel. As I said, I have a couple of courses up there, and I've also been posting some RxJS content. With that, I want to thank you for listening. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much, Deborah. Did you get the message from YouTube? Is that your like custom branded linked channel, or did you just happen to get a YouTube channel with your name perfectly on it? I guess not the most common name in the world.
I really wanted Deborah Kurata without the underscore, and it told me it was taken. I didn't think that there was another Deborah Kurata that existed, but I was able to snag that. It's that new,
Yeah.
I've forgotten what they call
What
that.
they're calling it, but yeah, I got the
Yeah.
message too. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I tell you what, anybody that's listening here right now, if your name is available on a social media platform, go claim it now, because I thought I'd be real clever on Twitter once and use this RoboCell instead of my actual last name, and now some sunglass hawking bot is sitting on my Twitter account, and I can't rename myself. So try to steal your name if you can, everybody. All right, thank you, Deborah, so much for that talk. If you have questions about Deborah's talk or RxJS things in general, please feel free to drop them in the comments, and we'll get back to them if there's time at the end of the presentation. But for now, we are going to switch over and introduce Les Mis. So why don't you take it away?
So, hello everyone, and welcome to my talk. I'll be talking today about the accessibility and how to make your Angular app more accessible. So, accessibility matters. And before I start, let me just tell you a little bit about myself. My name is Lenis. I'm a Google developer expert for Angular. I'm based in Tunisia. I've been into Angular for the past few years, and especially on RxJS. And I'm the writer of Reactive Patterns in RxJS for Angular, which is available on Amazon and Pact and other book sites. And aside, I'm a speaker, mentor, trainer, and content creator. So without further ado, let's jump into it. And I want to start with a quote. The power of the web is in its universality, and access by everyone, regardless of disability, is an essential aspect. So this was Tim Berners-Lee, the creator of the web and the current director of W3C vision like 25 years ago. The web should be accessible for everyone equally, no matter the ability and the circumstances. So let's first agree on the accessibility definition. What does accessibility mean? So the accessibility is the practice of making your web application usable by as many users as possible, okay? And it's built around 4 principles, which is known by the four principle. So the application should be perceivable. So this is the first principle, perceivable for your users. It should be operable, which means that your UI components can be, or users can navigate easily through your application and your UI components. Understandable, which means that users can understand your content. And robust, which means that your application can be consumed by a lot of users of browser agent and can be used and consumed by assistive technologies. Okay, so those are the 4 principles. And when it comes to compliance, so maybe wondering at this level, is my application compliant? Is my application accessible? So when it comes to accessibility compliance, hopefully there is a standard, okay, which is the WCAG, and it stands for Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. It's a set of guidelines written by accessibility experts to address accessibility issues. Okay, and there are three releases: 2.0, 2.1, and 2.2 is in a draft version and will be released in 2023. And so you can find this standard and those guidelines in the official W3C website. There are a lot of rules there. So it's a number or a set of requirements that your application should satisfy, okay, in order to meet the accessibility standards and compliance levels. So you will find the different principles I told you about: operable, understandable, perceivable, and robust. And under each category or each principle, you will find a set of rules related to this principle. Okay, so you can check this out in order to have a complete and thorough view about the accessibility guidelines. And there are three levels of accessibility compliance. The level A, which means minimal compliance, level AA for acceptable compliance, and triple A for optimal compliance. Okay, and knowing those levels is very important because nowadays there are a lot of audits around accessibility, and you will find in your report your accessibility level. And some clients and companies are so severe with accessibility violations, and sometimes you can even pay some penalties. So you have to take care of this as a whole concept, and also uh, check the requirements and the rules of every level. Okay. Um, Now, how to test accessibility? Okay, so how can we test the accessibility so we can know before we ship our application to production if it's accessible or not, and if there is some violations, how can we like react to those and test accessibility? There are two, there are a lot of tools, but the most used and those I really recommend are Axe and Lighthouse. Axe is focused 100% on accessibility. Lighthouse is also an open source tool that checks the performance of your apps, of your web app, and the accessibility is included in the checks the Lighthouse performs. So yeah, so those are the two recommended tools nowadays. There are for sure some others, but those are the tools that I'm using. Okay, so now how can we automate accessibility workflow? Okay, the accessibility should be, we can test it, we can fix the issues, etc., and we can like reach a good level of compliance, which is the level AA. But after that, the code evolves, so there are bug fixes, new developments, new improvements, etc., and you may broke the accessibility again. So this should be automated, and you should put the accessibility check in your CI/CD pipelines. Okay, and the tools that you can use, I can recommend ESLint. Okay, so there are two packages that I really recommend. The first one is under Angular ESLint, the ESLint plugin, which is an Angular specific rules, which contains Angular specific rules for accessibility. And the second package is the ESLint plugin GSX A11Y, which is for the JavaScript ecosystem in general, not Angular specific. Okay, even the first package, which is Angular specific, is built on top of GSX plugin. So ESLint is a very good candidate in order to automate your accessibility checks. Okay, and you will have to populate the ESLint rules file inside your Angular project. Yeah, there are a set of ready-to-use rules already that you can find in the GitHub account and official documentation. And like you can also take advantage of those and also customize some rules for yourself. So ESLint is a good candidate for the automation. Now let's explore some rules and see concretely what we mean by accessibility rules. Let's see some examples of accessibility rules, in fact. So here, the first rule is use semantic HTML. And I will start by semantic a little bit in order to explain what it means. When we build UI graphical components, we use things like CSS stylings to convey visual affordance to our users. Okay. For example, I can use colors in order to tell him that this is active of a user. I mean, this is an active checkbox. This is an inactive checkbox. I can put some shadows and some custom styles to make a button look like a real button. I can add some hints in order to tell the user that this input is mandatory and you should fill it. And there are a lot of other examples. The examples are endless. But yeah, we use those things in order to convey some visual affordance to the user. But for users that have visual deficiencies, this meaning will not get conveyed to them. And this is normal because they don't see your screen. So in this case, we need semantics. Okay, so we can convey this meaning using semantics. And a semantic element has like some properties. I mean, the properties of the semantic elements are namely the role of this element. It's a button, input, select. What's the role of this HTML element? It has a name in order to differentiate between multiple elements having the same type. It has a value, which is optional. Sometimes there are values, sometimes they're not. And it has a state. Okay, some elements have a state, like the checkbox, for example, or the toggle button. They have some state. When we provide those elements or those properties, we are good with semantic. Okay, so we know what this element is for. We describe properly its meaning. And this is what semantic is. I mean, for example, here in the left side, I have an example of semantic elements. Okay, header, section, article, footer, table, select, button. All those HTML elements are semantic because they describe clearly their meaning to developers and to the browser. Okay. On the right side, you will have the non-semantic element. Okay, you can achieve the same result, you can get the same output, but using div and span. Okay, still it's not semantic, but you can get, I mean, the same output. Right? Okay, here again, button. Okay, on the left side you have a semantic. Okay, button, and the non-semantic you can use div and like add some styling in order to make this element look like a button. And there are a lot of other examples for sure, but always like you should always in your development give higher priority to semantic elements, okay? Because semantic elements describe their meaning to the browser and to developers, so we can convey non-visual affordance to people that have visual deficiencies. But again, you can say, okay, we understand the meaning of semantics, but how can this semantic get conveyed to non-visual users. So non-visual users use generally assistive technologies like screen readers. Okay, they are the most famous. And assistive technologies rely on semantics in order to speak out loud about the elements. Okay, so when the user focuses on some element, the assistive technology will retrieve the semantic, the name, the value, the state, and tell out loud the user the role, name, and content of this element. Okay, so it's kind of translating the semantics into some voice. And that's why semantics is important, because if screen reader does not find enough semantic properties, they will like translate something random, which is not, which does not have sense to the users. Okay, so it will not have, it will not like speak much to the users, and they will not understand what this element is about. Okay, and behind the scenes, there's what we call the accessibility tree. Okay, which is the same as the DOM. Okay, more or less. So there are the elements of the DOM, and the leaf elements represent the the element, the semantics, okay, of those elements. You can find the time, the name, the state, etc. This is an example of the accessibility tree, and the screen readers will read this. Uh, they will navigate through this tree, retrieve the element, and speak out loud to the user. Okay. So when we use semantic HTML elements, we can help screen readers and improve the experience of non-visual users. This will lead us to the rule 2 also, which is ensure keyboard accessibility. When using custom or semantic, HTML elements, we can take advantage from the keyboard accessibility support of the browser out of the box. And the keyboard accessibility support is nothing but making your application accessible by keyboard to help people with motor disability that can't use a mouse navigate through your application and use it. Okay, for example, you can use in your application, you have to support the tab in order to navigate between elements. You have to support the enter in order to execute and click on buttons. You have to support the arrows keys in order to navigate between the drop downs and the select elements. Yeah, so this kind of support. So ensure your application you have keyboard accessibility, and using the semantic HTML elements will help you get the support out of the box. Now, if we can't, I mean, some situations we can't use semantic HTML elements. We have to use some custom HTML. Okay, so how can we do? So here comes the area attributes, okay, which is the web accessibility initiatives for accessible rich internet application specification. And the area attributes are some attributes that we can use in the HTML that does not affect the behavior nor the look of your elements, okay? But they are there to help the screen readers get some semantics about your elements. So when you are forced or you have to use non-semantic HTML elements, you have to put some area attributes in your elements to provide some semantics and bridge the gap between like visual affordance and non-visual affordance, okay? And in the accessibility tree, you will have the DOM plus the area. Okay, so the algorithm behind this is, so if there is semantic HTML elements, so the meaning is there, the screen readers will um, navigate through the tree, get the semantics, and communicate them to the user. If not, they will check if there is any area attributes. If they find the area attributes, then they will find the semantics consequently, and they will know what to announce to the user. Otherwise, if none is provided, no semantics, no area, then they will like try to announce the content of the element, which is not significant. Okay, if it's there. Yeah. So we need to like provide some, keep in mind that you need to provide some area attributes if you are using non-semantic HTML in order to help screen readers and improve the experience of uh, people that have visual deficiencies. And this is an example of some area attributes. I picked this from the Angular IO website. Okay, so we can find here that there in those elements, the area label to provide the label of the element, area disabled in order to tell about the state of the element, disabled or enabled, area hidden, and in order to tell about the feasibility about the elements. And there are more than 35 attributes. You can check it in the official documentation that you can use in order to give some meaning to your HTML elements. Rule number 4 is define unique page titles. Okay, so we need always to provide unique page title when you have links, etc., in order to again tell the screen readers which this page or what this page is for. Okay, so we used to provide this with custom code before Angular 14 version. And for Angular applications, of course, here, starting from the version 14, the routes, okay, there are a new property in the when defining the routes of your Angular application, which is called title, okay, this property. And you can provide, when defining your route, you can provide the title of your page, okay. And if the title is not static, which is normal, okay, in some cases, then you can provide a title resolver, which is a custom class in which you will implement a method. And okay, so you will return the title at runtime, the adequate title at runtime. So you have both support, static and dynamic. So don't forget to define unique page titles for your apps. Rule number 5 is avoid using the autofocus. Okay, again, for people having visual deficiencies, when moving the focus will like make the screen reader announce things that maybe the user did not know he is like focusing on this element. So it's kind of confusing to move the focus without the user's ability. Okay, so we should keep the default focus mechanism to avoid disturbing the user experience. So avoid using the autofocus. Rule number 6, use subtitles on your videos. And you can, there are a lot of like third-party libraries that you can video content in your application. Don't forget to use subtitles and then upload your video, or you can use third-party libraries, and that will generate the subtitles on runtime. Rule number 7, remove title attribute tooltips. Okay, so never use title attributes because people that can't use keyboard and mouses and all this stuff, so they can't see the content of your tooltips. Okay, so at least if you're using tooltips, don't put relevant information there. So relevant information should be accessible without having to like use keyboards or mouse over. Rule number 8, add alt attribute for images. Again, this is a good rule. Again, for every image, you have to add the alt attribute to your HTML element in order to provide some description for this image, because non-visual learners and people with visual deficiencies will not know what this image is about. So the screen reader will tell them that, okay, there is an image which is for something. So it will help them. Rule number 9, be careful what libraries are you using, okay? Because there are use conform libraries, because sometimes your accessibility score is very low because you are using libraries that are not compliant with accessibility. So you have to fully check the library that you are using. And if you are using Angular, then in the Angular ecosystem, you can find Angular Material and the Angular CDK, which are compliant to the accessibility. And there is a lot of improvements in the version 14. And this is still also improving, because covering all the rules at once is not like possible. But they are improving little by little, and there are a lot of support, of focus, of styling in mixins, and a lot of improvements there. Last but not least, fix color contrast, and colors are also an important, the color contrast is very important, and maybe this is fixed by designers because before you start the development. But yeah, be careful of the color contrast, because there are people with some visual problems. They can see colors, or they have other problems, sight problems. So this will really will not like be very good with their experience. And I want to show you here quickly a new feature in Google Chrome. It's like here I'm using the example in Code Labs of Google Developer, and those are colors which are not good for accessibility at all. So here you can inspect and find here in your inspector. You can find here like the colors and the contrast ratio. So you can like find out from development if you have contrast problems. And you can even here with the cool feature, it's experimental. So here you can add rendering in your console, and there are some emulations here that you can play around. And here, yeah, so emulate vision deficiencies. So here there are no emulations, and you can emulate, for example, for people that have blurred vision. So this is what the screen will look like for them. Having Pronatopia. So this is what the screen will look like for them. Trypanopia, also another disease, and this is what it will look like for them. So you can play around it, and it's a cool feature here in order to emulate and to see how those people can see the colors in your screen. Yeah, so you will not like inspect the element by element in your application, that's for sure. The Lighthouse plugin will do the job, and you can like do and analyze your application, and even the colors and all the contrasts will, if they are wrong or they are not compliant, then they will be generated in your report. Yeah. So yeah, so that's all I have to tell you today. There are a lot of rules. I think the most important 10, in my own opinion, and every topic can fill a whole course. But I try to be like straight to the point. Thank you very much for having me. If you have any questions, or you wanna simply reach out in order to ask anything, then you can follow me on Twitter or my LinkedIn and my email, so you can find here all my professional accounts. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you. Um, Thank you to both of our speakers. We have a little bit of time. So as I mentioned in the chat, if you have any questions, this is your last opportunity to ask them. Of course, you can reach out to the speakers on Twitter, of course. But if you want them answered here today, please drop them into the chat. In the meantime, I guess to start us out, with RxJS, it's something that's been around in the Angular community since it started. And, we're six years or so of people using it day to day in Angular world. I'm kind of curious for both of your perspective, because Limis, I know while you didn't give a talk on it today, you've written a book on RxJS, as we mentioned in the intro. How do you think the community's general level and their perception of RxJS and their skill with it has evolved, if at all? I mean, I know we have new developers all the time that are learning it for the first time. That's why content like this is so valuable, and even to refresh for people that are advanced. But how at all has teaching and using RxJS changed as you both have seen it? I guess Deborah, if you want to start.
Interesting. At the recent NGConf, several of the Angular team members kind of talked to that point, and they've done surveys, and they've found that there is some number of developers that really think Angular should completely remove RxJS, and that it should, have a standard kind of fetch type promise-based way to work with data. And then at the other end, there are people that are really pushing to make everything in Angular streams in RxJS. And so they've done surveys, and they've looked at it, and they found that both of those groups are about equal. So being where they are is kind of in the center of that. So there is some thought that they must be good where they are, because they have about the same number on either side. So I don't think that directly answers your question, but I thought it was an interesting thing that they have spent time considering and thinking about. From what I've seen from sample code and that kind of thing, I think there are more people kind of using more of a reactive approach to their RxJS, which is really fun and good to see.
Great. Limis, any comments or thoughts different or?
I think that the community is around RxJS is growing, and you can find a lot of resources now. I mean, in the last 3 and 4 years, you can find a lot of resources or a lot of video content, a lot of things that help developers leverage their and improve their skills around RxJS. Okay, maybe this, from my point of view, I think that a lot of resources are there now, and maybe this will encourage people and developers to leverage the reactive paradigm in their apps. Okay, but yeah, if they have other alternatives or things, everyone is free to do the implementation which suits his use case. Okay, so yeah.
Great. Yeah, I mean, that matches. I mean, so funny, Deborah. I mean, we talk about that sometimes when we interview people for Angular. It's kind of an open-ended question, which side of that spectrum do you fall on, just to get people to chat about something that they're passionate about. But for the developers that love it, I mean, I see them take it with them to React or Angular or Vue or whatever other framework where they use. It's penetrating, but it has the same kind of camps that you talked about. Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm definitely seeing more articles and things on React with RxJS, and some of the other frameworks kind of picking that up. And there was still talk of making it part of actual JavaScript, though from what I heard, that's sort of still stalled.
Okay. And Limis, I know for the accessibility piece, some people listening to this, first of all, for anybody that was trying to keep track of the rules, you can catch this recording. It'll be available as soon as we're finished. So if you want to go back and take more notes, there was a lot of wisdom dropped in there. But for people, sometimes they feel intimidated. They feel like they don't understand accessibility. They feel like it's too difficult to break into. I think you did a good job of dispelling that. But for those people that are listening and are like, okay, yeah, that kind of made sense, but I don't really know what to do, so I'm kind of just intimidated to even start on it. What might you say to them beyond what you already said? Why should they dig into it? I think. I mean, other than for fairness reasons, but give them that pep talk, I guess.
Yeah, because I think that they have to go to a lot of emulation tools and see how many categories of users can see their application. Okay, how they see their application in reality. Okay, I think that every developer and every company want their application to be usable by a lot of people, right? So if they exclude a category of people, they will be happy. And if they, yeah, being like seeing how those people see your application in real life, I think that they will encourage them to do some work around accessibility. That's the first thing. Second thing is that's true. It's a little bit difficult, but nowadays there are a lot of tools that can help you. Okay, you can start with Lighthouse. It's very simple to set up the plugin in your Google Chrome or in your browsers, and you can like see the report. And there are a lot of step-by-step guides on how to fix this problem. Okay, and yeah, so today there are a lot of tools that can help you, and even the guidelines. If you read the guidelines and the official documentation, that are not so hard to understand. So you can even start with the minimal compliance, and then like go to the other levels. But yeah, so even I really recommend like to put some budget on accessibility. Okay, because sometimes developers don't estimate, the accessibility, and managers don't like put some budget. Yeah, so you have to put a budget, you have to estimate it, put it in your development workflow on your automation level, so that your developers can really do it, and you will start like encouraging them. Yeah.
If you want to build that empathy, I'll tell you what, I spilt a glass of water on my mouse last week and I shorted it out. And I had to try and order a new mouse from Amazon using only my keyboard. And I'm telling you, nothing will get you on the accessibility train like trying to use your own website with only a keyboard. Try it out one time and see how it works for your users and get just a sense, a taste of what the internet is like for people that
How
isn't
they're
built for them.
struggling.
Yeah, absolutely. All right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, both of you, for being here to speak with our viewers today. Thank you, all of you that have joined us remotely to be a part of this meetup. We hope to see you all next time. And as we've said, the conversation doesn't stop here. Make sure to reach out to our speakers on Twitter. If you didn't catch their handles, you can rewind backwards in the video, and we'll make sure it's in the description for people that are watching this after the fact. But thank you all so much, and we hope to see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.